Per unit tax, elastic versus inelastic demand, and tax burden. We're going to look at demand from perfectly elastic all the way to perfectly inelastic demand. Notice in this graph that the demand is perfectly elastic at $10. If the government places a per unit tax on this product, it doesn't raise the price at all. The producer surplus goes down from originally 2, 10, all the way here to the equilibrium to now 2, 5, and to whatever this point is, and that the business picks up all of the burden of the tax. But do you notice that if demand becomes relatively elastic and not perfectly elastic, the producer surplus rises, the tax revenue stays the same, but then there is some consumer surplus here. Do you notice now the burden of the tax isn't completely picked up by the business? Some of the burden of the tax right here is picked up by the consumer. As demand now becomes more inelastic, do you notice now the producer surplus increases, the consumer surplus increases, and the burden of the tax now is going more from the producer onto the consumer. Notice the consumer's burden of the tax is increased. As the demand curve becomes more inelastic, do you notice producer surplus increases, consumer surplus increases, and the burden of the tax in this situation is equally shared? But if the demand becomes even more inelastic, do you notice the burden of more of the burden of the tax is placed on the consumer relative to the producer? And then finally, if the product becomes completely inelastic, then the entire burden of the tax is placed upon the consumer.